Hey.
I'll go.
Hey, man, it's a little chicken wing.
Yeah,
Chicken
there we
wing
go.
for you.
Hey, everybody, and hey, Steve.
Hey, bro.
It is
What's up,
so good to be with you all. Welcome. It is crazy to think about. Easter was a week ago.
I know.
Already. Insane. We had such a great Easter together as a church family, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. And one of the main ways that we celebrated last week was by an online gathering. We did a 24-hour prayer gathering. Incredible. And the coolest thing about this, Steve, we had 1,700 people show up to this thing. A lot of people. So it's so cool. We wanted to celebrate that, and we also wanted to let you know. Maybe you're out there and you're like, why didn't I know about this thing? And you want to be a part of it? If you want to get engaged, text CONNECT to 733.
733.
There you go.
So speaking of connecting, we are going to tell you about the new app that's launched. It's not a new app, it's an updated app. So you're going to want to get out your phones. You're going to want to put the Southeast app on your phones. Go to your Play Store, go to your App Store, get that installed. Check it out, it's a good app. You're gonna wanna use it to stay up to date, all the content coming out of Southeast Christian Church. Speaking of content, you're in student ministry, I'm in kids ministry, and we've been pushing out some really cool stuff for kids. A few weeks ago, we started Southeast Kids Online, and it's been amazing. There have been thousands of families joining us every week, worshiping together in their living rooms, wearing their pajamas, and it's been so much fun. We've heard so many stories of kids just having a great time connecting, and parents leading in the home, reading scripture with their kids. It's been awesome. We've even had some kids who have expressed an interest in getting baptized through all this, trying to make arrangements for that. It's so cool.
I love it. I love it. I love what you and your team are doing. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old at home.
God
and
bless
we've been fitting your guys' church services in right between tantrums. We got tantrum, we'll do church, and then we got another tantrum. It's been great, but you're keeping me sane. So thank you for all that you and your team are doing. And hey, if you're a student out there, middle school, high school student, we just want you to know our church is for you. We know this is not an easy time to be in middle school, to be in high school, and we just wanted to let you know with everything that is getting canceled and stopped in these days, there's something that hasn't been stopped, and that is relationships, and that is student ministry. They're both still going across the entire city. We have student ministries at every single one of our campuses that are still running. We're doing online programs, we're on YouTube, we're doing Zoom small groups, we're playing games together. Steve, we're even playing Xbox and PlayStation together. So if you're in middle school or high school, jump online, find us on YouTube, search Southeast Christian Students, or jump on the Southeast website or the new app and send an email if you want to get connected. We want to meet you.
Hey, remember that food drive we did a few weeks ago?
I do.
It was incredible. I stopped by and saw pallets and pallets of food. Well, here's what we're hearing from our partners. The need has just been growing exponentially, and they need more. And so as a church, we want to continue to meet the needs in our communities. So we're doing another food drive. All right, so this Friday, the 24th, and next Monday, the 27th, we're gonna have another food drive at all of our campuses. So if you've got extra ramen noodles or cans of things or perishables or we don't want perishables, I don't think. No meat products, please, but especially if they're open. Keep that bologna in the fridge. But if you've got paper products, all that stuff, bring it down. If you wanna know more about when you can pick those things up, you're gonna wanna text us. There's a short code called
Respond.
Respond, thank you. And you're gonna wanna text that to 733.
733.
And you'll find out about times and locations. Even if you're in Shelby or Bullitt County, we've got spots for you.
It's awesome. And Steve, what if there's people out there, like right now is not the greatest time for them to
Yeah, for some of you, it's your pantry that's kind of running bare, right? And so now's the time for you to receive, and we as a church want to help you. Best way to do it is to go to our church website, and there's a button that says Need Help. Click that button. We're here to help you.
Hey, something else I want to tell you about. If you're connected to a campus of Southeast Christian Church, one great way that you can stay engaged with us during the week is by hopping on Facebook Live. We do something every Wednesday at 7 p.m. called a family gathering, and you can learn how to get involved in a group that way. If you're not connected to one of our campuses, a great way that you can stay engaged with us and even become more connected to everything we're doing is by texting the word online groups, those 2 words actually, online groups, to 733.
733.
So make sure you do that. It's really awesome.
That's great. Hey, we're starting a brand new series this weekend, and you're not gonna wanna miss it. It's called Seeing God.
Seeing God.
Seeing God, and it goes through the life of a guy named Job. You know about Job?
I do. I know about Job.
It's 3 little letters, 1 really big name. That should be the title of the series next time. 3 little letters, 1 really big name. Job is a guy who, he had a rough life. I mean, things did not go his way, and yet he never lost his focus and his faith in God. And so we're gonna be seeing that over the next few weeks. Really encourage you to lean in, dial?
733.
No, it's the radio dial. Anyway, check out this series over the next few weeks. You're not gonna wanna miss it.
Hey, we're really excited for what is next it's time. We're getting ready to get started. This thing's about done. Yeah, so we're gonna get started. Church is about to happen. Get your kids in the room, everybody gather up, get your coffee. We've got something special. Let's worship together.
Where do I begin? You were always there beside me. When I felt no worth, you called me by my name. When the darkness comes and my enemies surrounding, I am not alone. Your love will light my way. 'Cause I know that you are for me, I'm not gonna give up. I'm never gonna look back, never gonna look back. Now I'm afraid, you have spoken over me. I'm afraid, and your love will light my way. I'm never gonna look back, never gonna look back. 'Cause I'm afraid, and your love will light my way. Hey. Light my way. When I walk through fire, God, I know you go before me. When the waters rise, I will not be swept away. No. 'Cause I know that you are for me, I'm not gonna give up. I'm never gonna look back, never gonna look back. Now I'm afraid, you have spoken over me. I'm afraid, and your love will light my way. I'm never life nor death could separate us now. You gave it all for me. There's nothing your love can do. So I kiss the wave, leads me back to you. When storms are crashing over me, I'm surrounded by your grace. I'm standing on the name of Jesus. When storms are crashing over me, Jesus, you're my living hope, the anchor for my soul forever. Lift my eyes to see you are with me now. You're the breath I need. You're my solid ground. You paid it all for me. There's nothing your love can do. So I kiss the wave that leads me back to you. When storms are crashing over me, I'm surrounded by your grace. I'm standing on the name of Jesus. When storms are crashing over me, Jesus, you're my living hope, the anchor for my soul forever.
Rock of ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee. Nothing in my hand I bring. To the cross I cling. Rock of ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee. Nothing in my hand I bring. To the cross I cling.
Rock of ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee. There's nothing in my hand I bring. To the cross I cling. Rock of ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee. There's nothing in my hand I bring. To the cross I When storms are crashing over me, I'm surrounded by your grace. Standing on the name of Jesus. When storms are crashing over me, Jesus, you're my living hope, the anchor for my soul forever.
Church family, I just want to take a second to thank you for your generosity over the last few weeks. It has truly been incredible. Your faithfulness in giving has allowed the light of Jesus to shine throughout our community. And as a church, we are so thankful for that. I want to highlight two stories that happened just this past week with two 11-year-olds. One who got online and was watching the sermon just like you are watching right now, and texted in on the chat that I'm hungry and we need help. And so the chat host that was there started to interact with that child to find out what was going on and to see if this was a legitimate need, and found out that it truly was. And after they got more information, they were able to reach out to the family and found out that there was a mother who was going through treatment for cancer and was unable to leave her home to get the needs that they had. And so quickly, several people got together, they gathered up the supplies that were needed, and they reached out to the family and took them some food and some other resources to provide for them. The other story is another child that was online on our 24-hour prayer. You may have heard this story. And during the 24 hours of prayer, this child gave his life to Jesus. These are two one-at-a-time stories that happened because of the generosity that you have displayed over the last several weeks. And so I want to encourage you to continue to give online. You can do that several different ways. Through your normal online giving way, you can drop your offering off at one of the campuses, or you can text the word GIVE to 733-733. You know, this is we've been doing this worship stuff now for several weeks online, and I don't know how you've adjusted to it, but I know for my family, we have gotten better with it over time. The first week that we did it, our family joins around in the living room at 11:30 to watch the service online, and my wife had prepared some chili for us that day. It was kind of a special moment. We've never done this before. And so as we're all sitting there watching the service and eating chili, I realized real quickly that this isn't going at all like I had thought. I'm eating the chili and watching the service, and then all of a sudden it comes to the time of communion, which was strange enough because I'm eating and then taking bread and juice all at the same time. It was a strange moment, and I felt like it was an absolute failure. I looked over to my one son who was lounged out on the couch, and he was able to take his bread and then, without raising his head, was trying to figure out how he could drink his juice. My other son was reclined on the recliner, and he's sitting there holding his cup of juice up, aiming it to fall into his mouth. And after that, when we found out that we were going to be doing this online service again, I talked to my wife and said, we have to do things different next week. And so we came up with some new rules, some new guidelines. One, there was going to be no food or drink. Secondly, there was going to be no devices that we were going to be on during that time. And everybody was going to be sitting up and not reclined down. But as I thought about it, I realized that, well, the first communion probably looked a lot more like the communion that we had in our home that first week. I mean, it would have been taken place during the Passover, and so there would have been other food that had been eaten there on the table. Not only that, but it was inside of home, and Jesus was gathered with those he was closest to. And most likely, they were all reclined at a table. You might think that's strange, but if you were to look in your Bibles at Luke chapter 7, you'll find there's another story where Jesus was in a home with some other people, a Pharisee who was there. And the Pharisee wasn't real thrilled with Jesus being there. They were actually trying to test him out to see, is this guy worthy to be followed? But also in that home, a lady came in, and she was broken. And she was crying over his feet. There were so many tears that were coming from her that it got Jesus' feet wet, and then she took her hair and she began to clean his feet. Now, if this were normal like we do today, it would have created a very awkward moment. I mean, this woman trying to climb underneath the table and trying to figure out which of these feet belonged to Jesus, but the fact that they were all reclined at the table and Jesus' feet were at the back helps this story to make a lot more sense. And so this morning, you might find yourself, well, in an uncomfortable situation. Like this isn't the way that you would prefer to do church, and certainly not the way that you would prefer to do communion. And so you find that this is kind of strange. It's possible that this morning you find yourself uncomfortable with all of this. Like maybe you have just tuned in over the last several weeks trying to figure out who this Jesus guy is and what's this all about. And even listening to us talk about communion is something that you are uncomfortable in. Or it's possible that you, like many of us, including myself, you realize that you are a sinner. And in this moment, you are uncomfortable with yourself because you know who you are. Well, in this moment of uncomfort, can I provide you with just a little bit of comfort? And can I ask you just to pause for a second and see Jesus for who he really is? And not only that, but would you take great comfort in knowing this, that he loves you, that he sees you, and that he has great compassion for you. And he displayed his love and his compassion when he died on the cross for you.
Can't go back to the beginning. Can't control what tomorrow will bring. But I know here in the middle, here's the place where you promised to be. I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? And as I walk now through the valley, let your love rise above every fear. Like the sun shaping the shadows, in my weakness your glory appears. I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again?
their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you, and behind you, and beside you, all around you, within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, and the evening, in the calling, and your going, and your leaving. Rejoicing, he is for you, 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 he is for you. May his favor be upon you in 1,000 generations, in your family, in your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you, and behind you, and beside you, all around you, within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming, in your going, in your leaving. Rejoicing, he is for you, 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 he is
I know that you can do anything, and no one can stop you. I'd only heard about you before, but now I've seen you with my own eyes.
This week, I'm starting off a new series of messages. But first, I really want to say a specific word to our church family. If you're not a part of our church family, you're welcome to listen in. But I just want to say to our church family that I have never been more proud and never been more thankful to be a part of this church. This past Easter weekend was not what any of us would have chosen, and yet God did what God does. And he works all things together for good and for his purpose. And so who would think that on a weekend where all 8 campuses were closed would be the one weekend we would have the greatest opportunity to share Jesus and the hope of the resurrection. I mean, we shared Jesus with more people than we have in the history of this church last weekend. And so I am thankful for the way that God works, that he is faithful. And I'm proud of this church family and the way that we have come together during this unprecedented time. That during a time of social distancing, we have been committed enough to each other to stay connected to one another, even though it's been a little bit more effort. It's required a little bit more intentionality. If you haven't done it yet, then I want to ask you to go ahead and download the Southeast app. You can go to your app store. It's a new Southeast app, and it will give you really helpful information, but mostly it'll just allow us to stay more closely connected to you. We'll be able to share resources with you. So if you haven't downloaded that, make sure you go ahead and download that right now. As a church family, this is a time for us to stay connected to one another, and it is a time for us to stay on mission. This is not a time for us to sit back and just kind of wait, hoping things will go back to normal. This is the time for us to look around and seize the opportunities that God is giving us. Because in the middle of this pandemic, I believe that He wants to unleash the full force of the church to love people one at a time. As you know, we are continuing to monitor both the when and the how of gathering back together in person. But I want to be clear about something. Make no mistake about this. We are currently pausing our in-person gatherings, not out of fear of catching a virus and not out of political pressure, so don't buy into that hype. We are pausing our in-person weekly gatherings for one reason. We love people and we care about our community. Now, I can't wait until we can gather back together again, but instead of spending this time fretting over exactly which week that's gonna happen, we are choosing to spend this time focusing on fulfilling the Great Commission. So let me be really clear. This is not a season where we are idling around the harbor, waiting for calmer seas. This is a season where we are going full throttle. We are raising the sails. We are catching the wind of the Holy Spirit as He is leading us into some uncharted territories. I can't wait to see what God is gonna do in us and through us during this unprecedented time. And church, do not forget and don't doubt for a moment that the church is still the church. In some ways, I'm thankful that this church in this season is proving what we've always preached, that the church is more than a weekly gathering of people in a building. Because people sometimes say that about our church. They'll say, hey, yeah, at that church, it's a big church and people just go there to be comfortable or to be entertained, but they're not really committed. And every week we go into this season, our church family is proving that that just isn't true. I mean, by the way that you are caring for each other, by the way you are engaging online, by the way that you continue week after week to give sacrificially, even though I know right now it's a little bit scary and the future's uncertain. I think about the blood drive that we had this past week at 5 of our campuses, and it was full. I think about the way this church is making sure that every food pantry in this state has food for people to eat. I think about, as a church family, how we have come together to care and to support our medical professionals. And so look, we may be socially distanced, but we are not spiritually disconnected. We may be separated, but we have come together. It's because we are the church. And the Bible says the gates of hell cannot stand against the church. And if that's true, then the virus doesn't stand a chance. So now is the time for us to lean in, right? Like during the season, we're not gonna step back and wring our hands and focus on self-preservation during this season. We're gonna lean in with open hands, and we're gonna focus on fulfilling the mission that God has given us. This weekend, I'm starting a new series through the Old Testament book of Job. It's called Seeing God. And for the next 3 weeks, we're gonna study the life of Job, and here's what we're gonna discover together. That when everything in Job's life falls apart, in that moment, he sees God more clearly than he ever has before. And my prayer for us is that that would be true in our lives as well. When everything seems to be falling down around us, that we will be able to see God more clearly. Before we jump into the book of Job, I want to tell you about this game. You can download this as an app on your phone or iPad. I'm not saying you should, don't necessarily recommend it. But the game is called Pocket God, and it's part of a genre of games called God games, where you get to play the part of God. And the way this game is advertised is, what kind of God would you be? And so in the game Pocket God, you get to play the part of God where you control everything for these islanders, primitive islanders that live on an island. And if you want to, you can make the sun come close to them and it burns them up, or you can pull the sun away and they freeze to death. If you want to, you can flick them off the island and they get eaten by sharks, or you can shake it and it's an earthquake. The point of this game is that you are in control. And if you want to torture them, you can torture them. But this game brings up some questions about the true God that I think some of us are wondering, even if we don't wonder them out loud. Questions of, is God really in control? Does God really care? Because it can feel sometimes like he's out of control. And if he's out of control, then we might as well just make the most of our time on the island and not worry about anything. Or if God is in control, then maybe he doesn't care, because it doesn't feel, at least right now, that he's too concerned about what a lot of us are going through. So it can either feel like God is powerless to help, or he's powerful but doesn't care. Either way, that leaves us feeling pretty discouraged and more than a little bit helpless. And so, in the midst of this pandemic, I know that some of you are asking the question, God, are you really in control? Even the way you pray has changed. You just have more questions, don't have as much confidence. When you ask if God is in control, I know some of you ask that, and it's more of an accusation, because you've got your own history and your own personal stories that make you wonder if God is really in control. But I know for a lot of you, when you ask about God being in control, it's a sincere question. Like, you really hope he is. It just doesn't feel like it right now. And so when we first learn of Job, he's coming to that moment in life where he's gonna ask some of those questions. Now, at the beginning of the book, Job chapter 1, Job is living what we might call the American dream PCV, the American dream pre-coronavirus, because his life is comfortable and it's easy and his kids are healthy and his business is booming. Everything is going well for Job. And then in chapter 1, it just starts to fall apart. And so a servant comes on the scene and says to Job, Job, all your sheep and all your goats and all your livestock have been killed, along with all of your servants. And look, in those days, there were no insurance companies. There was no government bailout. There were no small business loans that he could count on. I mean, he woke up that morning and everything was normal and predictable. Everything felt under his control, but by the time he went to bed that night, it was a wreck. He had lost everything. And he was probably at this place where he thought, it can't get any worse than this. Like, everything has fallen apart. But just as he's thinking that, there's another servant that comes on the scene, and the servant says, Job, I don't know how to tell you this, but your sons and your daughters and all of your children, they were at your oldest son's house, and a great storm came, and that house collapsed, and all of your children have died. And so he's lost everything. Never could have imagined that this would happen to him. And Job chapter 1, verse 20, after he's received this news, ends a little differently than you might expect. It says that Job stood up and he tore his robe with grief, and then he shaved his head and he fell to the ground to worship. He worshiped. And he said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. So in this moment of loss and grief, he still worships. He acknowledges God's power and God's sovereignty, and he puts his faith and his trust in God. But things don't get better from there. He begins to experience even more pain. He begins to experience physical suffering and illness, and he's got people around him who are just tearing him down. Like, his buddies come around him and say, hey, Job, what did you do to make God mad? You must have done something to cause all of this. And his wife tries to convince Job that God has turned his back on them. And she says to Job, just curse God and die. Just be done with him. And so Job keeps his faith, but he starts to ask some questions. He begins to question God. God, do you really care? God, are you really in control? Do you see what's happening? Because it doesn't feel like it right now. A few weeks ago, I had you Google a picture called the pale blue dot. And this picture was taken at the edge of our galaxy, about 4 billion miles away from Earth. And the Voyager took this picture of Earth, and you can just see that in this picture, Earth is this dot in that ray of light. And we said a few weeks ago, it looks like a speck of dust. And the question is, are we just a speck of dust on a speck of dust in a Milky Way that is a speck of dust floating through the universe? Because if that's true, then it's really easy to think that God must not care very much about what's happening on the pale blue dot. I mean, if that's all we really are, then do you really think that he is concerned that you can't pay the mortgage this month? I mean, do you really think that with everything happening in the universe, that he knows about the marriage problems that have surfaced in the midst of this pandemic? Do you think he knows about the difficult breakup you went through and the loneliness you feel? Or what about your kid's learning disability? You're not qualified to be a stay-at-home, homeschooling parent, but yet that's where you find yourself. Does God know? Does he care? And what about the pandemic? I mean, maybe that's a blip on his heavenly radar screen, but does he really care, or are we alone in this? And I think these past weeks, we've been forced to acknowledge some things. We are more vulnerable, and we are more fragile than we would ever want to admit. And so Job asks God some questions, but I think he's asking him these questions not just for himself. I think he's asking them for you. God, do you really care about the cancer? God, do you really care about the unemployment? God, could you please just explain yourself to me? Could you just explain the infertility? Could you explain the child abuse? Could you explain the rejection? And while you're at it, could you explain the pandemic? And in Job chapter 38, God has had enough of all of these questions from Job. And so now he speaks to Job. But listen, he doesn't answer Job's questions. He asks him questions. He doesn't say, okay, Job, you've got some questions. Let's just work through these one at a time. No, he says, Job, I'm going to ask you some questions. And these questions have a way of putting some things in perspective. And so just as we have questions for God, maybe these questions of God to Job are good questions for us to wrestle with as well. In Job chapter 38, verse 2, God begins his questioning this way. He says to Job, who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Who is this that pretends to know what they don't know? Who is this that thinks they understand what they can't possibly understand? He says to Job, brace yourself like a man, and I will question you, and you will answer me. And God begins a series of questions. Questions that we're going to look at over the next few weeks. Questions like this. Job, were you there when I laid the foundation of the earth? Because I don't remember seeing you. And Job, did you determine how much water the oceans would hold? And Job, did you set the time that the sun will rise? Job, have you comprehended the vastness of the earth? Do you know, Job, how many snowflakes are scheduled to fall on the earth? Job, do you know how light travels? Do you determine the course of water? Job, do you have the power to move constellations? And so God asks these questions about the details of the universe, and here's what becomes clear. God knows what we don't. God understands what we can't. And as we look at the universe, all the details and intricacies of the universe do not indict God as indifferent or apathetic or out of control. Instead, they reveal a God who is involved and very much in control. So let's imagine it this way. Let's imagine in heaven that there is this control room in heaven. And in this control room, there are all kinds of gauges and all kinds of controls. And all these controls are set exactly right. Hundreds of dials and gauges. They're set exactly right so that life can exist on this planet. Now, if God invites you into the heavenly control room, like what you don't want to do, you don't want to trip, Because if you accidentally just tap one of those controls, it can throw off the probability or possibility of life on this planet, because they're all set and finely tuned exactly right. It couldn't have happened by chance. Conservatively, it's been estimated that these dials being set correctly by chance, that the odds of that are 1 part in 100 million billion. It's like 10 with 53s a year. It's a lot. One scientist tried to help us kind of make sense of this number, and he said, picture it this way. Picture a bullseye on our planet that is a trillionth of an inch in diameter, so it's smaller than an atom. And let's just say you get a dart and you throw it randomly. The chances of that dart landing on that bullseye, which is a trillionth of an inch in diameter, the chances of that are greater than the dials of our universe being set the way they are for life to exist. And so this is sometimes called the teleological argument for the existence of God. And the teleological argument is simply an argument from design. The teleological argument would say that design demands a designer. And just as you would never get in a car or log on to a computer and assume that the car and the computer came to be by accident, you would never look at the design of the universe and assume that it's accidental. Or imagine it this way. Imagine that you take your kids to Mount Rushmore. And on Mount Rushmore, there are 4 presidents that are carved into the mountain. Like, what you wouldn't say to your kids is, hey, isn't that an incredible coincidence? What are the odds? What are the odds that the 4 faces of 4 presidents have been carved into this mountain? No, I mean, you would immediately know. A child would immediately know. Somebody did that. It was on purpose. And so as we look at the universe, it is infinitely more complex. And it is infinitely more ordered than a car or a computer or Mount Rushmore. And all of this points to a designer. What does that mean? It means that in moments like these, we have a confidence that God is in control. And though we live in a fallen world where the virus of sin has spread throughout the system, we are confident that God is in control and he is working things together for good. We are confident that his hand is on the dial. So I want us to look at just a few of these dials together. One dial would be called the location dial. And on the location dial, it has a lot to do with the location of the earth in context of the sun, that if the planet Earth was just 5% closer to the sun, then we would suffer the same fate as Venus. It would be like 900 degrees on this planet, which even if it's a dry heat, it's pretty hot. And if the Earth was just 10 to 20% further away from the sun, then we would have the same fate as Mars and things would freeze over. Think about the Earth in relation to the sun, not just with distance, but in size. Right? The sun is 1 million times bigger than the Earth. So you could literally fit 1.3 million Earths inside the sun. Here's where that matters. If the sun were a little bit smaller, let's say the sun was the size of 90% of the other stars in our solar system, then the Earth would have to be closer to the sun in order for us to survive. But if we got closer to the sun, the gravitational pull of the sun would lock our planet into place, and half of the Earth would be scorched and lifeless, and the other half would be frozen over and dead. And there are all kinds of these fine-tuned dials. We could talk about the dial called gravity. And if that dial were off even slightly, we would cease to exist. Stars would become too big or too small. The moon would become an issue. Like, the moon is precisely the right size and distance from the Earth. If the moon moved closer to the Earth by a fifth, just a fifth, then twice a day we would have tidal waves 35 to 50 feet high that would cover most of our planet. Consider a dial called crust of the Earth. If the crust of the Earth were thinner or thicker, it would throw off the magnetic field, and if the Earth's magnetic field were weaker, our planet would be devastated by radiation. If the magnetic field were stronger, our planet would be devastated by electromagnetic storms. And don't forget about the atmosphere dial. The atmosphere dial, of course, is this protective blanket that surrounds the earth, and it's made up, if you remember, it's made up of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. But what's so intricate about this is it is the exact right balance of gases. If one of these gases were off even a little, it would create this either severe greenhouse effect, or we would be bombarded by cosmic radiation. Consider the label dialed rotation. The rotation of our planet. Our planet, Earth, it rotates on its axis at 1,000 miles an hour. And we're orbiting the sun at 70,000 miles an hour. And there are times when the sun comes closer to the earth, and at that time, the earth starts to spin faster, so it won't be drawn too close to the sun. There are times when the earth gets further away from the sun, and the earth slows down so that we still have these seasonal changes. And if you think about the earth rotating, it gets off of a straight line by 1/9 of an inch every 18 miles. So every 18 miles, it gets off 1/9 of an inch. But what's unbelievable is if it diverted from its axis, from its course, just 1/8 of an inch every 18 miles, we would be too close to the sun and we would be incinerated. If it diverted from its course 1/10 of an inch every 18 miles, we would be too far from the sun and things would freeze over. Now look, there are all kinds of dials like this. There's dozens of them. There's hundreds of them. I've heard someone try to explain these dials by saying, hey, it's unlikely, but these things happen by chance. And so you could look at one of these dials and you could say, hey, the chances of that dial being set exactly right is about 1 in 10 million. And it's unlikely, but it happens. It's like the odds of winning the lottery. 1 in 10 million, but somebody wins. Okay, I'll give you that. But let's say that someone goes out and wins the lottery 2 times in a row. And that's pretty lucky. Let's say they go out, they win the lottery, and they win it the next day, and the next day, and the next day. For a week, you might start thinking, well, maybe something's going on here. But let's say they go out and they win the lottery 200 times in a row. You'd start to wonder, right? You'd start to wonder if there's more to it than luck, more to it than chance. And these are the numbers that we're talking about when we talk about the dials of our universe. And so they reveal a God who is very much in control. The father of rocket science, Dr. Wernher von Braun, came to this conclusion. He said, as I became exposed to the law and order of the universe, I was literally humbled by its unerring perfection. I became convinced that there must be a divine intent behind it all. He goes on to say, my experience with science led me to God. But must we really light a candle to see the sun? In other words, we could talk about these dials. We could go to great length to discuss the scientific discoveries, but must we really light a candle to see the sun? I mean, isn't it obvious? And this is what David proclaims in Psalm 19. The heavens proclaim the glory of God, and the skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day, they continue to speak, and night after night, they make him known. They speak without a sound or a word. Their voice is never heard, and yet their message has gone throughout the earth and their words to all the world. If you will, in the middle of everything that's happening, step outside one night and look up into the sky. God is shouting to you a message. He is powerful. He is in control, and things right now may feel like they are spinning out of control, just as sure as our earth is tilted at 23.5 degrees and spinning 1,000 miles an hour. Like that's what it might feel like in your life right now, but God's hand is on the dial. And there's all kinds of evidence that we could point to, all kinds of evidence that demonstrate that God is in control. I think though, the problem that we have with this whole idea is probably the same problem Job had. It's not necessarily whether or not God's in control, it's that we don't really like how he's controlling things. If it were up to us, if we were in that room, if our hand was on the dials, then we would change some things really quickly. I mean, we would do some things differently, but here's what we're gonna discover in the next few weeks. And there's so much comfort in this, that we worship a God that's so much bigger than we are. He sees what we can't. He knows what we don't. Should he somehow reveal the answers to us and let us see the plan that is unfolding throughout history, we wouldn't be able to understand or comprehend. And there's something very comforting about worshiping a God that big. And so my prayer for you and my prayer for me during this strange time is that we would finally realize we are not the ones in control. You're not in control, and you never were. And my prayer is that as you realize that, as I recognize that we would see God clearly, maybe for the first time. Because at the end of Job, at the end of his story in chapter 42, after he's gone through all this pain and suffering, and after he has sat and listened to God ask him all of these questions, Job 42, verse 5, Job prays and he says to God, God, my ears had heard of you before all of this, but now my eyes have seen you. Something happened to him. His world fell apart and he went from hearing about God to seeing God. He went from knowing about God to knowing God. And it changed his relationship with God. And that is my prayer for all of us, that in the midst of this, we would know God in a way that we never have before. Stephen Canaster is a scientist, and he points out that in 1992, there was a Hubble photograph that was taken, and it answered the question of what's at the center of our galaxy. So for years, scientists correctly speculated that at the center of our galaxy was this black hole. And a black hole, of course, is this, it's a region of space in which the gravitational field is so powerful that nothing, including light, can escape its pull. And so Hubble took a picture of the center of our galaxy from 31 million light years away. And here's the picture that they had. Right at the center of our galaxy. And Stephen Canaster points out, he says, what you're looking at here are two dust rings circling the nucleus. That's what that is. Two dust rings circling the nucleus. Really? Is that what I'm looking at? Because to me, it looks a lot like a cross. And maybe it's just a coincidence, but the reality is the cross represents the time in history where God seemed most out of control. That when Jesus was on the cross, it felt like God had lost control of everything. His son is being nailed to a cross. It seems like that's all the evidence that you would need that he's out of control. And before the cross, the disciples they believed Jesus, they followed Jesus, but they just couldn't see him. Mary just couldn't quite understand, couldn't quite see him. But the pain of life, when he is on the cross, it fills their eyes with tears, and sometimes we see God most clearly through tear-filled eyes. And so as the Son of God hung on the cross, there is this very clear message that is being sent out. He's in control. And it may just be that God's very purpose and plan is unfolding exactly in the moment things seem most out of control. His hand is on the dial. So, I wonder what God is removing in your life right now so that you can see him more clearly. I wonder if some of you have experienced loss, maybe not the same degree of Job, but it sure feels like it. And things around you have just kind of fallen apart, and increasingly you're not sure how they're going to get put back together again. And maybe like Job, you started off worshiping and putting your hope and confidence in God, but as time passes, you've begun to ask him some questions, and you're waiting for him to answer. But I think God has some questions for you, because he wants you to know that he knows, he sees what you can't, he understands what you don't. And that means we can put our trust in him even when things don't make sense. And so, if this is who God is, if God is all powerful, if God is in control, if his hand is in the dial, on the dials, then the right thing for us to do is to pray a very simple prayer. Just to pray, God, I need you. I need you. I can't do this on my own. I am dependent on you. I need your help. It's one of the most spiritual things you can do is humble yourself before God and just confess the truth that you need him. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for the fact that you are at work, that even when we don't see it, even when we can't feel it, that you're at work. I thank you, God, that your hand is on the dial. I thank you that our perspective is very limited, but your perspective is eternal, and you're working things out to accomplish your ultimate purpose. You're allowing some difficult things temporarily to accomplish eternal good. And God, I pray for everyone listening to this, that in this moment, they wouldn't waste this time. They wouldn't waste the pain or the struggle. I pray, God, that they would see you. And when they see you, when they get a glimpse of you, I pray that together we would just cry out and acknowledge our need for you. So, God, we thank you that you forever demonstrated your power, your control, your sovereignty, and your love for us when you sent Jesus to die on the cross for our sins. God, I pray that that pull would be irresistible, that nothing could escape that kind of love and that kind of sacrifice through Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen.
Jesus, you're my hope and stay. So teach my songs to rise to you. When temptation comes my way, and when I cannot stand so far.
Well, we are so glad that you chose to worship with us today. We hope that it was an encouragement to you wherever you are, and we would love to connect with you, especially during this time. So if you need prayer or want to know more about what it looks like to follow Jesus, simply text the word CONNECT to 733-733. And immediately following this service, each of our campuses are going to be live. So if you are part of one of our campuses, you can head over to your campus-specific Facebook page, and people from your campus will be there chatting live. And if you aren't part of one of our campuses, you can stay right here and chat with our Southeast online team. Either way, we want to connect with you and keep this conversation going. Again, thanks for worshiping with us today. We love you, and we'll see you next week.
Well, welcome, Southeast Online family. Thank you for sticking around. We're going to have a great conversation. Joining me are friends Taylor and Matt. Hey, guys, glad you're here.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Good to be here. I was thinking about how, just listen to his message today and how true it is, how so many things have adjusted and changed. But more and more what I saw coming out, and as I was interacting with people in the chat, is I see how things that might have been lurking underneath the surface, you bring everyone home, you bring work problems home, and you bring home problems home, and you bring school problems home, and you're at the middle of all of this. It all kind of starts to rise up over the last few weeks. Taylor, how's that interacted with you, trying to work from home and kids from home and with your husband and life? What's that been like?
Yeah, I think like so many others, I'm working from home full time, and I have a 4-year-old who
Which
is
I'm sure
right
does great.
in the middle of it all. It's so great. It's so great. Week 1, talk about control. I realized that I had to not control any aspect of it and just let it go. Same with my husband. My husband's he owns his own business, and his business has been totally stopped because of COVID-19. And so even within that of having a husband that I'm now trying to encourage and speak identity into, because he's taken it very personally, just like I think anyone is right now. But the control thing's hilarious, because I just realized that I had to let go of things and let them just happen. So we're figuring it out. I think every day is a new day.
Yeah. Those of you joining us, if you can, especially can connect there with Taylor's story and ours as well. Where do you see this control thing coming up? We were just talking about how, Job had everything happen to him there in chapter 1, and we see his response and kind of going through and what God's response was. And the thing, Matt, I kept thinking about was how I'd be a terrible God. Like if I was given all that power, I think I want it, but I don't think it would go so well. How's it going in the Reagan household?
Yeah, I'm like Dakota here that said he's showing his control in the places that only he can be in control. And so what I'm learning is, like my family, we're all in this one house. We all, I have 5 kids, and my wife and I, we all want to be God. We all want to control things, and we can't all be God. We can't all be in control. And so even if one of us had the reins, it wouldn't go well. And I really think that, I think a lot of us are seeing that there is a lot that we just can't control. And even if we wanted to be God, I don't think there's been a time like this where we've all recognized, even at our best, we can't control things. We're not in charge. And that's more true now, I think, than then. So.
Yeah, I love what Scott and Kathy wrote on Facebook just now. It says, as sinners, we walk into the trap of self-confidence, right? Job thought he was doing everything right and, following all the rules. But, we can think when things are going well that we're in control. And really what it shows us is it's more than anything else, it's an illusion, and so many times, like the curveball that came from this time in COVID right now is no one saw this coming. No one saw sports coming to a close and all those things. I know that was like that moment when I realized the NCAA tournament was shutting down. that's when I realized it's like, whoa, I never would have anticipated this. Taylor, what are you seeing coming in?
Yeah, I love what Dakota on Facebook said. I think he's forcing us to humble ourselves and surrender all false idols, drawing our attention from God. And I just think I work with students, and to even be able to unite with students in this, of he's just revealing things in us. My friend Tiana, she's on the teaching team at Albert Tate's church. She taught a few weeks ago, and something that was so good that she said, don't leave the season without taking inventory of what God is exposing in you. He isn't exposing you to embarrass you. He's exposing you to redirect you. And I love just that that's for all of us right now, is he wants to reveal some things in us, just to simply and kindly redirect us so that we can be more intimate with him.
Yeah.
I'd pipe in. I'm sitting here, and I chatting with so many people. This moment, COVID has caused some problems and struggles, but I think what a lot of us have recognized is COVID, if anything, in this season, if anything, has just exposed what was already, that we already were putting our hope and our faith in certain things, that we were, some of the marital things and some of the parenting challenges and some of those things. It's not like they weren't there, but with life as usual, we could kind of get around it. We could kind of pretend like it wasn't there or deal with it later. And this, if anything, has helped us recognize it simply, this is what's going on right now. And we can't hide from it right now, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I love exactly what Michael wrote on Southeast Christian's website, following along there with Church Online. Michael wrote, through trials like Job's and like what we're doing right now, walking through, we go from knowing of God to knowing God. And that's such a important thing because it's experiential. So I want to say, hey, I love seeing it. I'm following along on Facebook right now, and I see people out there like Marcy, Casey, Greg, Diane, Carrie, Jessica, and others. Thanks for coming in. How's this affecting you? Kind of a funny thing, just to lighten it just a little bit, is let us know, how's COVID haircuts going? I really want to know. I know we're all trying. Maybe it's COVID hair coloring, because I think we're gonna learn some real hair colors here in a second. Here, what's happening naturally. My advice on a haircut: don't keep going more. Just get good enough and just pause. Another joke I've heard from a radio show of all places, but I think this has some truth. And Matt, I'm going to bounce to you on this one. Is the joke was, is 5 weeks of COVID the same as 5 years as marriage? What's the truth lying underneath that, Matt and Taylor?
Depends on the marriage. Depends on the marriage.
What do you mean by that?
I think I think a good way to put it is this, and Kyle mentioned this. What is God removing for your life so you can see him more clearly? I think the reality is right now there are things being removed, and it's given us this opportunity to see things more clearly. I was watching the chat, and I was watching people as he was giving out all those dials and all of those, those metrics of God being in control. And I think it's really, some people were like, one of the comments was, hey, you're killing me with the math right now, dude. And I think one of the things that we can, I think it's a good season for us. We can be overwhelmed by one of two things, right? We can be overwhelmed by all the haircuts we're missing and all the places we can't go. And literally, I got a text just a little while ago on a sad note. My sister-in-law just lost her grandma this morning, literally at 11:30 this morning. And she was just texting us, and our heart just breaks for her. And she's not the only one, but she's ours. And they can't be there, and they can't support each other, and they can't go give hugs. And the reality is, we can be overwhelmed by all that we're missing, and we are missing a lot right now. But at the same time, this is a great opportunity to be overwhelmed with God's design and his purpose, that he didn't leave us alone, that we should be overwhelmed by his grace and by his mercy and by his power and by his provision. And so, there's a lot of, we're missing a lot, but there's also a huge opportunity to really see him in it too,
Yeah.
I think off that too, what David on Facebook said, all of us have time, talent, and treasure. How can we also give time and talent? And that's so true. Like off that, there are things that aren't canceled. And we just have to get creative with it, whether it's a simple FaceTime call to someone or a phone call, or just if there's people in your home, if there's little kids, or he wants to do something so beautiful within our homes. And I think it's just, whether it's getting the board games out, all those, creating a tent with sheets, I don't know, but there's some things that we just have to get creative on right now on what using our time and talent looks like.
Yeah, and learning that you'll be okay. You'll be okay with things that you thought you needed, you don't need. On Sheila wrote this on Facebook. There's a great deal of freedom and simplicity in the awareness that we do not carry, or sorry, we do not, nor we do not have to carry the burden of controlling our lives. Like that's not a burden we have to own. And when you understand that God holds eternity in his hands, it allows you to take what happens. I do appreciate Christy and Lawrence commenting in on Facebook on the hair thing. There's some good practical hair advice there as well with that. But remember, we're not in control of it. And I think the more we let that happen and allow God to enter into that control, it goes so much better for us. What else are you seeing in there, Matt?
One of the things I've noticed, and I noticed it in the chat, and I'm noticing it in life, like when this thing started going, the chat lines, I don't know if you remember when people started logging on, it was like, hey, good to see you. And people would say, hey, I'm having a rough time. And then their little praying hands would go up. And it was kind of like that Christianese, like, I'm praying for you, which basically means I'm just patting you on the back to make you feel better. And over the time, you get a couple weeks into this, and not just on here, but in life, people's prayers get more genuine and real. And in the prayers, even online, if you would have watched, there are people just praying for each other, long, lengthy prayers. Like, I'm not going to just pat you on the back right now. Like, I hurt with you, I feel with you, and I'm going to go right now, get on my knees, and I'm going to pray for you. And then I'm going to send you a note about what I prayed about because I'm with you. And I love how this has gotten a little bit more real. We've stopped doing some of the, hey, we're kind of in passing, this is going on, and we're recognizing these are real needs, and we can really respond.
Yeah, it's turning into real. About to close out here. Taylor, give me 10 seconds, and then Matt will come back to you, and then we'll wrap out of here. Taylor, 10 seconds. What do you want to say to SE Online folks about this?
Yeah, I think kind of just going off Matt again, I think, in the season, I'm so aware, and I've caught myself 3 very specific times saying to my daughter, I don't have time for that. And I'm like, that's so not true. I totally have time to, like, what am I saying right now? And so just that awareness, I know it's going to do something, and it's going to reap a harvest. So when we're saying those things, stop and just engage, dive in.
Matt, final thought real quick.
Yeah, number one, never been a better time to we're going to be overwhelmed one way or another, and to kind of move back from being overwhelmed by the world and what's going on, and to be overwhelmed by his grace and his power and provision. And then number 2 thing, the thing that Kyle kind of led to, and I know it was on his heart, was just because you're in the season doesn't, you don't have to wait for a church room or an aisle to make a decision.
No,
some of you right now.
2 last hour of people reach out saying, I'm ready to be baptized.
I mean, right now, I think that some people are waiting on like a catalyst to make a decision. And so I just want to kind of pop that bubble. Just make the decision, like right now, like get on your knees and say, God, I've been running things my own way. I didn't need you. I was far from you. And now just like Job, I had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. And God, I have to have you in my life right now. And now is the time to make a decision. I just encourage anybody out there, if you're ready to make a decision, hey, we're here. God's here. Like, let's just get this done. Like, let's decide on who you're going to follow and who you're going to put trust in. So
thanks, Matt. Thank you, Taylor. And if that's you, what Matt was just saying, send us an email, southeastonline@sccc.org. We'll follow up with you. If you need prayer, if you've got a question, if you've got a need, if whatever's happening in your world and you want us to know and come alongside you as a church, we are here from you. Other than that, we're glad that you stuck around. Thanks for being here. We'll be back all the same time. Stay connected through social media. And we look forward to worshiping with you all and praying for you all next week. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.